Good morning, good afternoon, good whenever you are listening. This is the Pylon Dons Fantasy Football Podcast. This is Ben Weiner speaking to you right now. And if you are watching us on YouTube, to my left, you have the wonderful AJ Carrion. AJ, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Had a great Mother's Day weekend. It was really nice to celebrate that. Was able to see some friends as well. All in all, had a pretty calm weekend. I'm starting a shift change at work, some changing responsibilities there. So getting used to that. But so far I really like it. So yeah, things are looking pretty good right now, Ben. How about you? How you doing?
I'm hanging in. I had a nice weekend at home for Mother's Day, too. I made some sushi with my mama, and my grandma taught me how to make the family cookie recipe. And on this particular morning, I made like this really healthy breakfast, and my body feels like good. I had like eggs and cheese, some broccoli, and an apple. And like my body just feels like ready to rock for the day. Like my vision's all good. I can read small print. Like my back isn't too sore. I had a little leg day. So I'm feeling pretty good. And what I'm really excited to talk about is how every single person listening to this podcast should be following AJ and myself on Twitter at Ben the Pylon Don, at AJ the Pylon Don on Twitter, at Pylon Dons on Twitter, at the Pylon Dons on Instagram, Pylon Dons Fantasy Football on YouTube. And as always, we are sponsored by Verse Gaming. So keep the house out of your bets with Verse. And we got to talk about vets because right now, we're in this long stretch of the offseason where everyone wants to know, like, bro, Isaiah Likely's your tight end too over Greg Dulcich. How dare you, bro? Like, everyone just wants to talk about rookies. And like they say in fantasy football, we got to zig when they zag. And we have been talking nonstop about rookies. Who wants to hear Breece Hall out of my mouth again? Not me. So today we're going to be focusing on veterans who were impacted by rookies and how that's looking.
Yeah, there's definitely more than a few vets that were impacted pretty heavily by the NFL draft. A lot of teams, of course, with what we saw in the first round, trading up to get receivers, it really just changes the way that you have to view some of these guys, especially when those receivers not only got first round draft capital, but teams were trading up to get these guys. And even beyond the first round, there were some impacts across the skill positions that are really that we think are really going to influence. And we'll talk about some of the trades that happened as well, including some of these big names. So I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, and we're gonna go into this hard and fast today, like a Jerry Jeudy slant route, because we are now recording before I start work, which means that I have to start work at some point. So we are about to hustle and bustle and drop some facts along the way because we're gonna be rushing that much. So let's get it started with the biggest move, probably in the craziest NFL offseason ever. In years past, it would absolutely be the biggest move of the offseason, but the biggest move of the draft was the Eagles trading I believe it was the 18th overall pick to Tennessee, where Tennessee would then take Treylon Burks, but the Eagles got A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown is now a Philadelphia Eagle. A.J., what is your initial reaction to how that impacts the Eagles offense and who's in there?
It's a definite downward trend for A.J. Brown because no matter how you look at it, going from one run-heavy option offense where he was far and away the primary pass catcher, and then going to yet another run-heavy offense, but this time they actually have other pass catchers, and the quarterback is a little less of a guarantee to be able to throw the ball on a weekly basis compared to Ryan Tannehill. It definitely hurts his upside. I do think that in Dynasty you have to hold A.J. Brown just because of the hit he took, but I'm still seeing A.J. Brown drafted inside the top 12 receivers a lot in best ball drafts currently, and that's not something I'm necessarily on board with. If I'm going to take a receiver in a quote-unquote crowded offense at a similar ADP, I'm starting to lean towards a T. Higgins or a Jalen Waddle, just that's part of a better, more reliable offense, and in my eyes has a little bit more guaranteed volume. Ben, what do you think? Because I feel like A.J. Brown will need 120 targets from Hurts, and Hurts will need to take a step forward in order for A.J. Brown to meet those top 12 expectations.
So I'm really happy you asked my opinion on this because this has been keeping me up at night. I'm going to publicly backtrack something on the mic that I tweeted out because about 2 weeks ago, I tweeted, if I was an A.J. Brown owner, I'd be scared. And that was how I felt initially. Jalen Hurts is not a great passer. This is a run-heavy offense. Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert are some legit competition. And I mean, there's still some Quez Watkins truthers out there. But I've been thinking about this a lot. And the conclusion I've came to is we are about to find out how good or bad Jalen Hurts can really be. Because he has one of the best run games in football supporting him. And now he has one of the best supporting casts in these three guys. These three weapons are as good as any other room of weapons in the NFL. Seriously. If you think about it, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, that checks all the boxes. You could argue that's better than Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rob Gronkowski at this point. There's a case for it. I'm not saying it's like set in stone, but it's certainly better than Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Travis Kelce. This is an elite room of weapons. And I learned from a mistake last year because last year I was really out on Lamar because it was a running offense. I didn't think they were going to pass very much. And I was fading all of these weapons. I was fading Mark Andrews. I wasn't into Hollywood Brown. And you were telling me, AJ, well, they didn't just take Rashad Bateman in the first round to keep running the ball, especially off the injury. And I was like, no. Greg Roman would never throw the ball that much. But you were right, and I was wrong. So I'm kind of at the point where I think in the first 2-3 rounds, I'm willing to take the risk on A.J. Brown's talent because I think this Eagles team is telling us they want to throw the ball more. However, this certainly hurts Devonta Smith. And it certainly hurts Dallas Goedert. Devonta Smith, to me, is unfortunately more of a flex play and a dynasty buy at this point. And there's a chance in my eyes that Dallas Goedert's not even a top 10 tight end. Tight end is as crowded as it's ever been in my eyes. But I think that A.J. Brown could have a shot to be a strong top 15 receiver. And like we forget, he's only been a wide receiver once. I know that I was like, oh my God, AJB is a freak. But in terms of fantasy, he's really just had like 8 40 bombs, and that's pretty much kind of been it. So I think he has a chance to continue his streaky production and finish high at the end of the season. And additionally, I'm really into Jalen Hurts at this point. After Trey Lance, he's been one of my favorite guys outside of my top 5-6 quarterbacks to be taking lately because he has everything he could possibly need. So I guess what I would say is I'm holding the line on A.J. Brown. I'm in on Jalen Hurts. I'm neutral on Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert, who? That's all I got.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert is easily the biggest loser just because any influence on the target volume of a tight end, that is removing targets from that tight end, is immediately going to drop them down multiple spots in any rankings because, like you said, the tight end position, A, is so crowded, and B, there's only so many guys getting more than 65 targets anyways. So
yeah, like how could I have Dallas Goedert above TJ Hawkinson, Dawson Knox, Dalton Schultz, but maybe even Mike Gesicki, dare I say it, with all this going on? Because here's the thing, it's funny. It's not really even about like the targets for me. It's like, how many good throws does Jalen Hurts really have in him in a game? You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if Dallas Goedert gets 7 targets. If A.J. Brown gets 7 receptions, that's probably half of what Jalen Hurts has in the bag.
So the thing about A.J. Brown is that his career high in targets so far is 106. He had 105 last year, 106 his sophomore year, and then 87 his rookie year. So AJB, ridiculously efficient with the touches that he gets. Of course, one of the most efficient receivers in the NFL from a fantasy perspective. I think that efficiency will likely stay because a lot of that was based on him after the catch. And there's a possibility that playing with more weapons is going to open the field more. So I'm opening the door for me to start backtracking if we start hearing really good
logic with my backtrack.
Absolutely. And when you referenced what I said about Lamar and Rashad Bateman last year, I did start to rethink through, it doesn't matter how much this quarterback likes to run. If a front office is getting this guy a bunch of weapons, they plan for the quarterback to use them in today's NFL. So
exactly. So now let's take this over to one of my favorite teams in the entire NFL to discuss because they are just so friggin' perplexing, man. Let's take it over to Green Bay, where we've been monitoring so much of what has been going on with the Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love drama, the A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones backfield. Is Allen Lazard the next great wide receiver? Well, Green Bay drafted 3 receivers in this year's class, not in the first round, but one pretty damn close. So they took Christian Watson at 34th overall, Romeo Doubs in the 4th round, and Samori Toure in the 7th round. So running down this Packers team, Rodgers, backfield, Lazard, how are we feeling, AJ?
Rodgers is going to keep doing what Rodgers does. I think that Green Bay got a lot of flack day one for not picking a receiver, and I'm pretty sure they heard the noise. I don't know if I like the Christian Watson pick over, say, a Sky Moore or a George Pickens personally, but it is of note that the Packers did take him in the 2nd pick of the 2nd round. So, like, basically first day draft capital. It's similarly to where Elijah Moore was drafted last year. And to me, I don't really, even though it is good draft capital, I don't think the Lazard train is going to be coming to a full stop. I'm still pretty in on Allen Lazard because even though bringing in these 3 receivers really hurts, 2 of them are day 3 picks. And Lazard has by far the strongest rapport with Rodgers out of anybody in this receiver room, especially with Marquez Valdes-Scantling no longer there. And stuff like that is what Rodgers tends to prefer. I mean, hey, we saw the ghost of Randall Cobb immediately come in, regain Rodgers' trust in a matter of no time, and get some serious, legitimate fantasy volume. So I think Lazard could sort of fill that Cobb, Jordy Nelson role. Not to say he'll be the fantasy player those guys are, and he'll be that reliable target in between the 20s that Rodgers maybe looks to first, rather than a rookie Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs.
So I view that Allen Lazard survived the draft, in my opinion. I understand why they took Christian Watson, but for me, I think that Christian Watson is one of the more raw prospects in the draft. I think he's going to have one of the harder times adjusting to the NFL level. Love the prospect very early on. Obviously, I backtracked on him, but we're focusing on veterans today. And my main point is that I think Allen Lazard is the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay by name. Because the real wide receiver 1 in Green Bay is none other than Aaron friggin' Jones, baby. I think this Packers backfield, it is so wheels up. I want Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon in every single draft. I think that this team is really going to run through those 2 players. Because Aaron Rodgers is going to do Aaron Rodgers things. He is going to throw a Hail Mary to Christian Watson, the new MVS. He is going to pepper Allen Lazard with targets in between the 20s and in the red zone. Maybe even Robert Tonyan can catch something, but probably not coming off that ACL of his. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are 2 of the best running backs in all of football. Don't get it twisted. That's just how it is. And if you don't think that this is a Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara type situation, you got another thing coming. I want both of these backs in redraft. I want them in Dynasty, at least for this season. And I think that these 2 guys have strong chances to both be top 18 backs. I'm still in on the Lazard volume. And as for Aaron Rodgers, where he's being drafted about is like the quarterback 9, quarterback 10. I'm totally cool with that. But that's the beauty of drafting a mid to late round QB is that you get like one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL later. And betting against Aaron Rodgers is never a good idea, so I'm comfortable with Rodgers at ADP.
Yeah, unless it's the NFC Championship game, definitely betting against Rodgers is a bad
Fantasy football's already over, not my problem. I don't care if he stinks it up.
But yeah, I'm still projecting this backfield to be the main focus of this offense. I'm really glad you brought that up. I do think Lazard's ceiling is a little bit capped, but I definitely think he still poses flex upside. But yeah, Aaron Jones, if you look at his splits without Devontae Adams, his receiving volume goes up tremendously and his depth of target goes up pretty significantly. So it's not like they're just throwing more screens to him. They're like actually getting him involved as a receiving option. And as for A.J. Dillon, this doesn't influence him at all. Matt LaFleur knows what he wants to do with these 2 running backs. I think he made it pretty clear at the end of last season. And I don't think that's going to change this year.
I think we're going to see a lot more of Aaron Jones in the slot on 1st and 2nd down. And a lot more two back sets as well. that like these two guys are the best playmakers on the offense alongside Aaron Rodgers. So this is the answer. Like I think I want to come out and say it because I want the receipts. I want the people to know that this is what Ben Weiner is thinking on whatever the heck today's date is, Wednesday the 11th in the morning of May. I think these two guys have an outside shot to both be RB1s. It's a hot take. I can't like plant flag because A.J. Dillon's never been an RB1 and Aaron Jones has been. But I really think that A.J. Dillon, 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns is light. And I think that Aaron Jones could lead all running backs in receptions, provided Christian McCaffrey, even if CMC is healthy, to be honest with you. So that's where I'm at there. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I don't hate that call at all. Christian Watson's not going to be a high volume guy out the gate. So I'm totally with you in terms of still being invested in this backfield as the focal point of the offense for this season. Taking it over to Arizona, Hollywood Brown being traded to the Arizona Cardinals for the 22nd overall pick. I believe there was a third on one end or the other involved in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben. But we're going to talk about not only how this influences Hollywood Brown and potentially some of those Arizona Cardinals, but how it's going to influence Rashad Bateman, who is now essentially the lone top dog in this receiver room by a pretty wide margin. I mean, I'm not terribly worried about Devin Duvernay coming in and stealing his volume, at least right now.
Well, are you worried about James Prochet? Okay. No, so all jokes aside, so these two guys, we can talk about them kind of lumped together. So for Hollywood Brown in Arizona, now that DeAndre Hopkins has been suspended, now that that has happened, I really like Hollywood Brown because he's the only receiver with a pulse who has any sort of credibility in my eyes on that offense. Sorry, AJ Green. Sorry, Rondale Moore. If you're an Antoine Wesley truther, maybe time to go back to the waiver wire because he has 7 weeks of volume coming his way. Antoine Wesley could be the second best wide receiver in Arizona. So sorry, AJ, who's thinking, Ben, shut up. Because I know you like Antoine Wesley. Hollywood Brown, for me, his stock totally boosts as like I'm from a dynasty wide receiver 3 to a wide receiver 2 now with like weekly top 15 upside. And as for Rashad Bateman, this is great news for Bateman because I kind of view him as getting like the lead wide receiver targets that him and Hollywood have split. But the wide receiver 1 in Baltimore is undoubtedly still Mark Andrews. Yeah. So don't get that too confused. I think I'd rather have Hollywood than Bateman in Dynasty and in redraft next season. But both of these players are absolutely rock solid wide receiver 2s and unbelievable flexes.
Yeah, so Hollywood's ADP already on Underdog has climbed inside the top 24 receivers. And I think that's perfectly okay. I mean, you know, Hollywood.
I've been drafting there. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, Hollywood is going to be with his former teammate Kyler Murray, who, in my eyes, is a far superior passer to Lamar Jackson. Arizona will likely be running the ball less in between the 20s and throwing less to the running back position because now instead of Edmonds and Connor, it's just James Conner and also the addition of equally large and bruising individual Keontae Ingram, who they took on day 3. And I think a lot of people in Dynasty and even in Redraft 2 are going to be looking to sell if Hollywood succeeds out of the gate without DeAndre Hopkins there. But I would urge those, if that does happen, to really hold the line because I think the fireworks in Arizona, if they do connect for these 2 former Oklahoma teammates, is something that could be a long-term play for Hollywood and his fantasy value. So even though the temptation is definitely going to be there if he succeeds in those weeks without DeAndre Hopkins is on the wrong side of 30. He's not under contract for much longer. And I really do think that they did this to appeal to Kyler specifically, and Kyler will likely be happy to throw Hollywood the ball.
Totally agree. I will say that I would have a little more urgency because if Kyler's unhappy, this could be Cliff Kingsbury's last year in Arizona. If this doesn't work out. So I would expect them to really be coming out ready to rock and roll. But aside from that, I totally agree. Let's take it to Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh drafted George Pickens in the second round. So, AJ, how do you feel like that affects Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson?
Deontay Johnson will likely not be a Pittsburgh Steeler in 2023, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
Without Ben Roethlisberger there's no desire for him to stay, really. That was his guy. When they took him 2019 in the 5th round, he developed a rapport really quickly as sort of the quote-unquote AB replacement for a little while. George Pickens doesn't play similarly to Deontay at all. I don't think they're going to be competing for any of the same targets coming into the 2022 season. So I'm still comfortable drafting Deontay where he's going right now as the wide receiver 15, sometimes 14, sometimes a little closer to 16, 17 for the 2022 season. And then for 2023 and beyond, it's really hard to predict situations that far out, especially for free agents. So that's just something that time will reveal itself for. As for Chase Claypool, though, his goose is potentially quite cooked because he may not be under contract in 2023 as well. We've got George Pickens, who plays outside, 6'3", 200 pounds, basically similarly an athletic freak to Chase Claypool. They're going to be competing for a lot of the same yards and a lot of the same targets. And on top of that, Chase Claypool did not do himself any favors with his antics last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if Pickens immediately succeeds in camp and Mike Tomlin can really get George Pickens on the straight and narrow, that Pickens could be an immediate contributor and really be the A-B situation with Claypool as that outside big play receiver to Deontay continuing to doing what he does.
I can't believe they sent Chase Claypool out there to announce that pick. Someone should have been like, yo, like, not you. Like, someone should have thrown Benny Snell out there or, like, Mason Rudolph. Like, I don't know. Just not that. Maybe even get Kenny Pickett out there to get really excited. But my feelings on this are Chase Claypool is totally nerfed for next season as, like, outside of best ball formats, because guys that talented will have their weeks, don't get me wrong. But I'm pretty comfortable with Deontay Johnson next year, even without Ben Roethlisberger. I know they had that rapport, but good players earn targets. And Deontay Johnson, to me, is unquestionably the best receiver on this team. And George Pickens kind of muddies up Chase Claypool, maybe even Pat Freiermuth for me. So I'm really only interested in Deontay Johnson at ADP because I feel like he's the only guy I can really trust with his role, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's the only Steelers receiver I'm currently trusting at ADP right now.
Yeah, so this next one should be quick. With Austin Eckler, they drafted Isaiah Spiller. I don't really think that Spiller is going to cut into Eckler's work at all. I think that it's going to be a really good thing for Eckler, and Spiller has an outside shot to win that slow running back role that they love so much in between the 20s. My only thing is that from a dynasty perspective, I'm a little more nervous if Austin Eckler goes down, that maybe when he comes back, if Isaiah Spiller plays really well, that there could be a shift in the workload. But going into the season, I don't expect very much to change. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't expect much to change either. We've seen other day 3 running backs come in behind Austin Eckler, get some carries, but really not challenge him for any of that meaningful fantasy volume. Carries in the red zone, receptions in between the 20s, even receptions in the red zone. I mean, hell, Austin Eckler with another top 5 running back season, and it just feels like we don't talk about him enough, if I'm being honest. That's my little 2 cents right there, but I'm going to keep it pushing. Isaiah Spiller, a much bigger running back than Austin Eckler, so I could see him potentially upending some first down work, especially if the Chargers are up in games.
Definitely.
But I don't care how good of a receiver Isaiah Spiller was in college, he is not touching Austin Eckler's targets.
Totally.
And if you think so, you're good. Trust me, it's not happening.
Totally agree. So taking it over to Washington now, we got to talk about 2 guys. One of them has been getting criticized a little more than the other, and I'm going to have to hop on the mic and defend my boy. But Terry McLaurin, who is not my boy, and Antonio Gibson, who is definitely my boy, Each got a little competition in the form of Jahan Dotson and Brian Robinson. To get the faster one out of the way first, AJ, how are you feeling about Terry? And then we'll get into Gibson.
This is the faster one? I had a little, I had it kind of flipped. But
interesting. Okay, well, we can still start with Terry. We'll just take our time. Life is a highway.
People think of Terry as this possession receiver, and he actually has a significantly higher average depth of target than guys like DJ Moore and Jarvis Landry. When he is able to be comfortable in an offense, a little bit more of a field stretcher. That's what we saw in the first half of 2020 when he was playing alongside a healthy Logan Thomas. But yeah, I think Jahan Dotson is going to be more of an underneath receiver. I do think it negatively impacts Terry because Terry was a little bit reliant on being the number one in terms of volume by a pretty significant margin. But now Curtis Samuel will be fully healthy. Jahan Dotson will be entering the offense and likely be playing out of the slot. You bring in Carson Wentz, who doesn't really typically target smaller receivers as much as he would like to target bigger, safer possession receivers. So he may not fall in love with Dotson and pepper him with targets right away. But I think if Terry has a hot start to this season and you own him in Dynasty and there's someone that needs a receiver and you're not selling Terry McLaurin, as much as I love him, I think you're out of your mind. So I don't think you spent a first on Jahan Dotson for nothing. I think that they think they'll be able to go fill the role of speedster or big-bodied receiver through the draft or free agency over the next couple of years. And I think they really liked what they saw in Dotson, and I don't necessarily blame them.
Maybe I thought this would be faster because we both know I don't have any Terry McLaurin. But no, I agree. I think that long-term, Dotson will be the next number one eventually. I think it's definitely a signal that Terry McLaurin isn't long for Washington, be it like his maybe some trade requests or maybe contract disputes. But honestly, I'm pretty out on Terry and honestly Dotson for redraft. Anyone who's Carson Wentz's number one isn't very appealing, so his number two certainly isn't. So that's my stance on that. But as for Antonio Gibson, everyone is freaking out, man. Everyone is like, oh, Brian Robinson is coming in to steal the work. And Antonio Gibson is done for. He's not an RB1 in Dynasty anymore. He's not an RB1 next season. He's done. Maybe I'm sticking my head in the sand. Maybe it could even be a bad case of take lock. But because Brian Robinson wasn't this guy that we were chomping at the bit to roster in Dynasty, that we thought like in the right offense could come in and be this guy, I'm honestly not too concerned. Like, I don't want to go as far and say that I'm buying this Gibson dip. That would be honestly a little foolish. So it's like, let's look with our heads and use our eyes. And they did spend top 100 draft capital on Brian Robinson, who came from Alabama, is not a bad prospect. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that he is much better than Antonio. I don't think he's nearly as good as Antonio Gibson. And I don't think the Commanders do either, for that matter. If the Commanders took Kenneth Walker at 47, I'd be feeling very, very different about Antonio Gibson than I am with Brian Robinson at 97. I almost kind of feel like we got out by the skin of our teeth. But I still think that Antonio Gibson is just going to be a better value in drafts now, is pretty much where I'm at on him.
So the issue with Gibson for me is that you have Robinson, who didn't have an amazing physical profile coming out of Alabama. He's an older running back. He's a much bigger running back. He's not a threat to the receiving game. And Ron Rivera comes out and says they plan to use them as a 1-2 punch. That terrifies me. That combined with them vying for J.D. McKissick when he almost signed with Buffalo and getting him to return, those two signings together really concern me because they clearly have a vision for this backfield, and it doesn't involve Antonio Gibson being a workhorse. That's what 100%. I gathered from them taking this pick. I want to give a shout-out to Jeff Bell for this one. Through Antonio Gibson's first 2 seasons, Gibson averaged 14.4 and 14.3 PPR points per game. If Brian Robinson takes a touchdown here, a touchdown there, 15, 20 rushing yards, and even catches a ball every now and then, that 14 turns into 12 really quickly. And then you're looking at running backs like where Chase Edmonds finished in a points per game standpoint, closer to 25 than 10. So I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think Gibson is talented enough to potentially upend Robinson in training camp and earn the work. But Gibson also hasn't fully stayed healthy. So if Robinson can seize an opportunity, I don't know. I'm personally pretty good from a dynasty perspective on this backfield. I still am taking Gibson in redraft, who's being taken close to the RB 16, 17 now. I think he's just too talented on a week-to-week basis to pass up there. But there's definitely a realistic chance he finishes closer to RB 24 for sure.
So what I will say, so two things, and this is not how I feel with the Brian Robinson thing. This is how some other Antonio Gibson truthers are hanging in, and they feel like maybe Brian Robinson can help keep Antonio Gibson on the field as the backup, working him in more. But the other thing, and this is like my own, so people understand my evaluation, is I'm not really factoring in J.D. McKissic. I understand there was competition to sign him, but 29-year-old running backs coming off injuries, even in pass catching roles, I really think that Antonio Gibson is going to put J.D. McKissic in a blender come training camp, and I think he has a chance to get some more of those receptions, which I'm really excited about. I don't think this is going to be the same J.D. McKissic.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming off that injury. Definitely might not be the same player, so I don't hate that at all.
So,
go ahead.
No, please.
So, real quick, we'll do one more. This will maybe take 90 seconds. Juju Smith-Schuster obviously impacted by Sky Moore to the Kansas City Chiefs. I didn't say Travis Kelce's name because if you think anybody is influencing Travis Kelce's volume,
he's good.
You're crazy. Don't worry about it. But Juju Smith-Schuster, a meteoric riser this offseason after signing with Kansas City and Tyreek Hill's departure. And then they bring in Sky Moore, who is a possession receiver that plays over the middle of the field, really thrives off in-out slant routes. They take him inside the second round at 54th overall, just 2 picks after George Pickens. Originally, it was just Juju, Travis Kelce, 50 yards of dust, and then whatever track star the Chiefs were going to bring in for training camp that made the roster. By bringing in Sky Moore, it changes the look of this offense, and it makes me worry that Juju is going to be playing outside a lot more. And I think him versus a speedster on the outside is something that could completely go 50-50 because in this Chiefs offense, obviously, they're all about stretching the field. Plus, I think the combination of Travis Kelce and Sky Moore, if Sky Moore does fall in the good graces of Mahomes quickly as Mahomes' security blanket, spells pretty bad news on a weekly floor for Juju Smith-Schuster, because I do think there's going to be games where he could straight up be phased out of the offense and they'll figure it out. However, I do think his upside is really good, and when we've watched him play alongside other good receivers with a good QB, he has been fantastic. But again, he requires a decent bit of volume. He's not necessarily the most efficient after the catch or doesn't necessarily have the craziest nose for the end zone. So I think it's definitely a bit of an L for Juju Smith-Schuster that Sky Moore ended up here. And hopefully he'll be able to make it work along the outside because I was really hoping he'd play more in the slot like he did in 2020.
Yeah, I still think that Juju will be in the slot, and I think they are going to use Sky Moore more so on the outside. However, there's an outside chance that Sky Moore is better than Juju Smith-Schuster right now. That's not out of the realm of possibility. Sky Moore is a very talented player, and they use some real draft capital to get him, and I think he's going to be in that Tyreek Hill role, but maybe with a little less volume because, come on, he's not Tyreek Hill. No one's Tyreek Hill, and certainly not off rip. But look, I told you to sell Juju. I told you they were bringing in a receiver. So what are you going to do? I got caught holding the bag with Juju in one league just to hedge myself, but I sold him everywhere else I had him. And I got to say, I think that Juju Smith-Schuster has weekly flex upside. And still, though, he's still the number 2 receiver in Kansas City. I'm not in on MVS. I don't want any Amico. I'm not buying in on this Justin Ross noise. It's still the pecking order, in my opinion, goes Travis Kelce, Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, and List. So it's not like Juju is dead, but he's kind of tired and a little worn out, and I'm not really fired up about having him in my lineup.
And he's coming off a pretty bad injury as well. So first year off the ACL, like you said, is not always the best time to buy in. I'm going to be really interested in monitoring what we hear out of the Chiefs camp and how his stock fluctuates throughout the offseason.
And you guys know exactly where to keep getting your info on that, because we will keep you posted. We are hanging on to every single tweet like our lives depend on it, because we are the Pylon Dons, and this is our fantasy football podcast. My name is Ben Weiner.
My name is AJ.
And we will,
you guys.
Take it easy, and we'll see you next week. And sorry I cut you off, AJ, but we had a real fun show, and there's some great content coming next week, so stay tuned.